Damien, how are you, my friend?
Very good, mate. Very good. How are you? Nice to be back.
Yes, well, it's great to have you back. Been on the podcast. This is the third time now, and yes, it's been massively eye opening the past two times, and
Great. Great.
I've been looking forward to our chat. When I saw you put a tweet out, it was something about escapes, and it's one of those writing area or reading areas, I should say, that I've just always found absolutely fascinating. Um, I've read a few books about escapes over the years. Obviously, Chris Ryan's
Yeah.
was it the one that got away?
Go away.
Um, I remember reading a book way back, and it was a cluster of about 12 great escape stories.
Hmm.
I think I don't think it was just Second World War based, but obviously that took up a big part of it. There was also one where a car rocked up to the Berlin Wall. They fired like a crossbow with a a wire and then a rope attached to it, hooked it up to the bumper of the car, made this death slide, and then people people escaped from, got to get my geography right, East Berlin down this death slide, and just absolutely incredible.
Brilliant.
And and there's another book I should mention, the Long Walk, I believe it's called. You're probably
Yeah, I
familiar
know the
with
book.
it,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
and I love that book. Is it Stanislaw?
Yeah,
Well, I'll get his name up in a sec, folks.
yeah,
But
yeah.
talked about escaping from a Russian gulag
Mhm.
and walking all the way to India. And it's a great story. It's really popular. It's been made into a Hollywood film. But there's one part in the book about uh, a chapter from the end where he says, "Yeah, we got into the Himalayas and we saw this big brown hairy animal, and I now know that it's a yeti." I'm like, oh, I think we might have an issue with credibility. Because of course, when he wrote it, it was probably 80 years ago or something, or 50. People didn't know that yetis were. Well, I don't want to ruin anyone's party, but
Mate, he was probably dehydrated and hallucinating. We can cut him a bit of slack.
yeah, there
Yeah.
we go. There we go. So, we were just chatting about our mutual friend Des Powell, SAS.
Mhm.
Hello, Des. If you get to watch this, incredibly nice gentleman, typical SAS, so unassuming that you just would never know this man was an elite trooper, fought behind enemy lines in Iraq. The book, Bravo 30. Just read that off my paper because um, Bravo 30, number one Sunday Times bestseller, and so it should be. Were people surprised, Damien? Sorry, friends at home, I should say that Damien co-wrote it with Des. Um, were people surprised that there was a third SAS patrol out there?
You know what, mate? I was surprised. When Des reached out to me, and we met. I knew very little about his military career, and he'd started talking about Bravo 30, and I was like, no, don't you mean Bravo 20? He said no. There was Bravo 10, Bravo 20, and Bravo 30. We were three, and I didn't. I've read all the books, Chris Ryan's and it Abs, but it hadn't settled into my consciousness certainly. So when he started to tell the story of Bravo 3, it's one of those tales of eight men, sent deep behind enemy lines to stop World War Three. I mean, what's not to like? And then it's the Iraqi desert, and it turns into the worst winter in living memory in the desert. And yeah, so they're battling not just to stop World War Three and the enemy, they're battling not to freeze to death. So it's just one of those epic, survival against all odds stories that just grips you from the get go. So yeah, and as you say, what a lovely guy, what a gentleman. When we met, he said, I can't do his accent. He said, I've got my secret weapon on me, and I was expecting something a bit goodsy, And I said, what's that? He says, it's my Saurine malt loaf. I never go anywhere without Saurine malt loaf.
Oh,
Can pick it up.
well, I share something in common then with an SAS trooper. That's good. Yes. Um, yeah, very, very humble man, and I think that would surprise. I mean, you must have met a few troopers now for your. Well, I
Yeah,
mean, my God, gosh, you've done some incredible books. Here's one of them. Um, uh, I'm guessing it's probably hard not to find a humble trooper because it's integral to the job role.
absolutely right, mate. So from the very get go, when Sterling and Paddy Mayne and Jock Lewis and others founded the SAS in World War II, one of the credos, one of the foundation stones was no bragging, humility. Um, you know, you keep the fighting purely for the enemy. So no brawling in bars, no bravado. It was built upon that foundation stone. So the very idea that you might go out there and sing, your praises, your elite status from the rooftops was never going to happen. And in fact, those individuals who were, recruited, who had a tendency to do that, were very quickly returned to unit. They were having none of it, and that ethos has, continued to this day. Which is as it should be.
Yeah, it's basically they don't want any like water mitty tosspots, do they?
That's right. You got it.
They want people that are just happy to be under the radar and literally doing the job.
Yeah.
Mm, yes. Did I ever tell you? Did I tell? I might have told you. I had the privilege to share a room on my one of my para. I did two para courses, but on one of them I shared it with two SAS troopers. Um, Nige, I can safely say. I won't say the other chap's name just in case, but such wonderful guys. And it was great to just hear firsthand all about their selection and how it was. But there was one incident where we were all walking to lunch one day, scran as we'd call it in the Marines, scoff as they'd call it in the army, and it's always tradition in the Marines. You don't wear your beret to meal. You can walk through the camp without a beret on. It's just the way it's always been, and it's always tradition in the SAS that you basically don't wear your beret unless you normally a black woolly hat or something. So there were these two guys, Nigel and his Oppo, walking to Scran, and the RSM came out. It was I think it was the Para RSM, or Sergeant Major, and or maybe it was even the RAF, which adds even more hilarity to the situation. He went, "You men, get your effing headdress on now!" And they just went, fucking kept walking. It's one of the funniest things I ever saw. Um, I, I guess it must be not. It's nice for them to know that they have that backing from Hereford, don't they? That they are, they put the time in, they put the effort in, and they're not there to take shit from
That's right.
little moustache people.
That's right.
Um,
Yeah. I
um,
mean, even in the case of, Des telling the Bravo 30 story. I mean, he obviously had to go through disclosures to get that book cleared, but there was a lot of support because it's a story about guys with exactly that kind of ethos. Backing from the top. Lot of really crap kit. Let's be honest about it. A lot of the kit they went in with really not up to scratch, but still backed from the top, and you know trained to be these guys who could operate where practically no one else can. So they've got that confidence, that sense of, we can do it, going one step further, and they take that with them wherever they go, even when it's the RSM screaming at them on the parade ground.
yes. And so, latest book, Damien, SAS Great Escapes. We were actually talking about that in the in my introduction, and we somehow gone around the houses, which is what I love about podcasting. In the USA, Churchill's Great Escapes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm all ears, and I do know you sent me some notes, and I I promise you I did read them. In fact, I'm looking at them now. How did this one come about?
Yeah, it's one of those stories where so all these World War II books that I've written, I've kept coming across these tales of these just utterly mind-blowingly incredible, courageous, brave, unbelievable ingenuity, these escape stories, and how your mind just files stuff away and you kind of ruminate on it. And over the years, some of these stories have kind of fallen out into like this selection of the greatest, the top escapes. And so the book came about really as a result of that process. And eventually I thought, I've got to tell some of these stories because they're just remarkable. And I mean, by chance, it published pretty much during lockdown. And we needed stories of uplifting, human spirit triumphing and escaping from constrictions. And so kind of that whole gathering together of reading about all these escapes, researching all these escapes, and then that situation made me think now's the time to do this book. And I selected 7 because it's got that magnificent 7 ring to it, but also it enables you to tell each story in real detail, which is what I like to do. You really, each story is really brought alive, and and to make these individuals real. And I've had lots of help from lots of the family of those guys portrayed, the great escapers. And the really lovely thing is a lot of them have said, not only did you bring my granddad or, my father alive, but I've learned things about him I never knew before. And when you write a book and the actual family members say that to you, that's a hell of a good feeling. That's you've hit the bullseye. Yeah.
Oh, most definitely, definitely. Quite funny. I still get when I wrote my first memoir. Don't know how it's up there, folks. Eating smoke. Even though I use pseudonyms for everyone, just to be on the safe side, to be honest, you worry a lot, don't you, with your first book? You think you're going to have some massive lawsuit or something because you called some bloke a dick. But I genuinely never thought, Damien, I'd ever hook up with any of these people again. I probably thought half of them were dead if to be in truth.
Yeah.
And then little by little, through social media, I'm mainly the people just come out of your history and like, oh, Chris. Some of them are like, Chris, read your book, and I'm like, do you realize that like you're actually in it? You're like that. You were that character, and even recently a chap contacted me and said, Chris, I remember you from Hong Kong. You were a doorman. I was like, yeah, that's right. He said, I'm French. I used to chat to you on the. I said, you used to smoke Galois. And he said, no, they were actually like this other brand, and yes, it's, it, what am I trying to say? It's like a big void out there of history, and you can pluck out these moments that can mean so much to people, and would otherwise be lost.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's been one of the lovely things about Great Escapes is that as I say, I've been, I had help beforehand from a lot of the family of those portrayed, but also once they got the manuscript of the book to read, they came back to me and said things like, I never knew that about Dad. And, that's just like, wow, because you've unearthed something in the archives that, a little gem that they're like, wow, I didn't know that about my father. That to learn that now is such an amazing thing. So yeah, that's the great thing about bringing history alive, which is what we try and do.
Has it ever, I don't want to say backfired because telling the truth shouldn't backfire, but do people get upset with some of the things that you uncover?
It's funny you mentioned that. So I'm researching a new book at the moment, and I've come across this unbelievable story about a guy who joined the SAS in World War II, not for very long, and he turned into not only a traitor, but he signed up to the SS and to the British Free Corps, the British unit that fought with the Nazis. I mean, it is like this unbelievable. You couldn't make the story up anyway, and some of the children are still alive of that guy. He was also a serial philanderer and bigamist and a fraudster, and and then there's all the files in the National Archives of where he was brought back to the UK at the end of the war. He was investigated by MI5. They were going to prosecute him for treason and all the rest of it, and it never really got off the ground. And going through my mind is, well, how will those kids feel? Do they know all this stuff? I mean, he's their dad. Despite the fact that he was married several times over, often to 2 or 3 women at the same time, and had a very, very checkered past. And was a traitor, no doubt about that. Absolutely, there's no doubt in the MI5 files he was a bad guy at the end of the war. But in the back of my mind is always the thought, well, there's family out there who probably still think he's a pretty good father. And can you be both? Can you be a great dad and also a traitor and a fraudster? It throws up all these really interesting questions. So yeah, I'll have to tread a bit carefully there. I'll have to reach out to them, I guess, and say, look, do you know these files exist? Do you know about this? The wartime history of your father or your grandfather? Because if you don't, you should, and I'll send them to you. But prepare yourselves. I think that's kind of the, as a historian and author, you bear some responsibility, and I think you bear some responsibility to try and ease difficult truths onto people for whom it's really personal.
Did you ever see that documentary fairly recently, like in the last 3 years? It was called My Son the Jihadi.
I know it. Yeah, I've seen some of it. Yeah. There you go.
Gosh. So friends at home. This chap from England, from a broken home. There you have it. There's your trauma, right? In an attempt to find himself. Well, this is me free forming here now, but from my own story, I'm guessing it was the same. He empathized or sympathized with the some Islamist radicals. I think in his case it was in Africa or somewhere, and off he went. Off he went to fight. And these conflicts are violent. They're nasty to serving military, nasty to the civilian population. And it was kind of as if obviously his dear mother just wanted him home. And then finally, the journalist that was making the documentary about, like, your son's gone off to fight with the jihad, fight the jihad, had to approach her and say, look, I've got some really bad news. I've got some footage and stuff, and I think it's your son. And so there you go. Yes, it was her son. And then worse still, he had to reapproach her, let's just say for argument's sake, a few months later, and say, look, I've just got some more information. Your son was known as this name, like L bloody so and so, and he had this document, and it listed the atrocities that he'd been in charge of, or committed himself.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking on children and innocence and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, and he said to her, look, do you want to read it? I'm torn. I'm torn. Like, I didn't want to mention it, and she's like, yeah, no, I need to read it. I need closure. And you could see her reading, going, and it was just bloody awful. But there's another scenario that I'm quite fond of reading about and watching films about, and that was the Rettendon murders. So, are you familiar with that, Damien?
No.
That was the range, also called the Range Rover murders. They took place in Essex in I think it was 1997, in which 3. I'm just going to say, for the sake of the podcast, alleged gangland drug dealer type type folks were slaughtered in a Range Rover in what was obviously a setup. And the thing was, everybody's cashed in on it. Authors have cashed in on it. Movie companies have cashed in on it. YouTubers have cashed in on it. Documentary makers have. And of course, if you're the son or daughter of one of those chaps that was killed in that vehicle, Jesus Christ, you want your whole life to be filled with other people saying what a bad bastard your dad was, and that he done this and he done that, and not just that, but the film angle where obviously they take a lot of artistic liberty to make the film, and then also making loads of stuff up about your old man that or your partner or whoever it might be that never even actually happened. So it's a sensitive area.
It is indeed. Yeah. You got to tread carefully, and when you're revealing to people stuff which is potentially, traumatic, destroys their ideal of who their brother, their father, their mother might have been, or their son in that situation. That's a hell of a responsibility. And as I say, in this situation at the moment, I'm researching this story. I'm like, okay, I've got to, I have to reach out to these people and say, look, are you aware of these files and do you want to see them? They might say no. They might say not interested. In which case, you've gone as far as you can go. But yeah, I'll have to do that because, if it were me and I were in that situation, and I'd at least want the approach to be made and given the option. You want to see this material that's been saved from World War II about what your father really did and who he really was, and you might find it shocking if you don't know. Yeah.
And we've got a couple of things going on here, haven't we? Because a lot of airmen were down behind enemy lines in occupied Europe during the conflict. Second World War conflict, folks, obviously I'm talking about. And I'm guessing a lot of them were just like, oh, well, my war is over. I'm just going to play chess and make cups of tea out of the same tea bag about 25 times. Whereas others had the old, oh no, stiff British upper lip, it's an Englishman's duty to escape. And we saw this chronicled quite well, I think, in the film The Great Escape. How it's great while it's going good.
Yeah.
But then, of course, Adolf Hitler brought out his Commando Order.
Yeah.
And this was just an attempt to say, look, these guys can't go back home. They're too dangerous. They're too dangerous to what we're fighting for. And if we get them, we will execute them.
Yeah.
Which put a completely different. It was no longer a game, was it? Not that it was a game anyway. But why do we think some people would try and escape, whereas others would be like, nah, sod that?
Do you know what? It's a really, really fascinating question, and that's one of the things that kind of became clear to me as I wrote the book. You'd think I've got to escape because I want to get home and see my family, or I've got to escape because I've got to rejoin the battle in freedom's cause, or I've got to escape because the food here is really crap and I've just got to get some nice grub. You think of all these reasons, actually, and you'll relate to this, I'm sure. When you boil it down throughout the 7 escapes, the real compelling reason all these guys risk everything, their liberty, their lives, horrendous torture, all the rest of it, it actually boils down to, and guilt isn't the right word, but you'll understand, it's the sense that they are languishing in a prisoner of war camp, pretty much safe and pretty much okay, whereas their mates from their unit are out there every week doing back-to-back operations deep behind enemy lines, fighting the good fight, risking their lives and dying, getting injured and being captured. It's that sense that they have to get back and rejoin their outfit, rejoin their unit, stand shoulder to shoulder with their mates and do the right thing by them. That's the real driving factor that unites all the stories. And, I'm sure it doesn't surprise you because you've served in elite units, but that esprit de corps, that incredible sense of being part of something, being part of this brotherhood, this where you would lay down your lives for each other. If you're languishing in a POW camp, pretty much safe, pretty much okay, just about having enough to eat. It's the sense you've got to get back to your mates and rejoin the battle alongside them, which drives these guys to undertake the most extraordinary, escape attempts. And some of these guys in the book SAS Great Escape, some of these guys, it's not just one escape attempt. I mean, Burns' story in particular, an SAS guy captured in North Africa quite early on in SAS history. His escape attempts are serial. There are dozens of them, and he becomes such a bad boy when he's eventually imprisoned in Germany that they just pretty much keep him on solitary confinement and starvation diet for all the time he's there. Yet he never gives up, and he actually managed to make it out towards the end of the war. So yeah, these guys, what drove them? When you boil it down to the really, really, it's not, I've got to go out and fight the Nazis, or I've got, by my honor I have to escape, or that's my contract with the military. It's none of that. It's my mates are out there fighting. I stood shoulder to shoulder with them. I can't do that here. I've got to get back and rejoin the fight with them.
Yeah, I can maybe interject there. I've got a few examples of things I saw in the Marines that were, I don't think our civilian counterparts would have been up for. In no particular order, we were on an exped once, so an expedition, like it was a jolly, it was a mountain bike trip. Can't even remember where it was, but I think it might have been the Lake District or something. So basically it was go to a hire shop, everyone grabs a mountain bike, and then you head for the first pub. And then when you've hit that pub, you head for the next one. And this was our day trip. And at one point there was this massive downhill, and of course, it was it our whole troop? It might have been our whole company. I can't remember. So it was either 30 or 90 bootnecks all flying down this hill. Of course, it's bound to happen that someone came off, and one lad just went skidding down this hill, just lost all layers and layers of skin all down his body from literally head to toe. Not sure how we got him in an ambulance, but he went off to hospital, and it was bad. And then the ambulance brought him back to the camp we were staying on, and it was like, are you all right? Are you all right here? And so he's lying on his bunk. We're all trying to, make sure he's okay. And then, of course, we all started getting ready to go out for a beer. And he kind of looks up, and he looks at his jeans, and he starts trying to put his jeans on. I was like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm coming with you." No, don't be. No, I can't. I'm not missing a night out with the lads. And he had to pull these jeans on over all these scabs and stuff.
There you go.
That's a silly example, but then we also had one chap that worked so hard in Northern Ireland on our Northern Ireland tour that I literally watched him pass out in front of me of exhaustion. Literally, just bang.
Yeah.
It's just chain smoking to keep his adrenaline up, and coffee drinking, and bang, and it's just wanting to put that effort in. And the other one was, of course, Jock, Jock as I refer to him in my memoir, was the chap that got shot in our patrol, hit 3 times if you include his equipment. And you'd think when you've been hit 3 times by a Kalashnikov, especially once in the chest, you'd go, right, where's the friggin' ambulance? I'm a celebrity, get me out of it. No, refused, would not get in that ambulance. He said, I'm patrolling back in with you guys. And more than that, he was up at 4:30 in the morning before all of us lot, and he was out on patrol with another team because he realised he just wanted to get straight back at it. You know, just if he didn't get back on a horse,
Mhm.
and again, it's like you say, it's that. I guess it's what the military do really well is they drum it into you, not letting the team down, and I guess
Yeah,
that's
yeah. I mean, that sense of team spirit, that sense of fighting spirit. I just showed you it earlier, but I'm reading that at the moment. It's the Rommel papers. It's General Erwin Rommel's. It's kind of like a memoir. It's his diary from the Second World War. Point being, Rommel said about the Africa Corps in North Africa. Of course, the first opponents of the SAS. That's who the SAS fought in North Africa. And he says of the Africa Corps, our greatest single attribute was our fighting spirit, our esprit de corps. And he actually says of the British, and it's really fascinating, he says the single greatest weakness of the British who we were fighting against was that their commanders were stuck in a kind of like conservative World War I mindset. Whereas we were fast-moving mobile warfare, take opportunities, do the most unexpected thing. And he says the only exception from the get-go was the commandos and the SAS who were doing the long-range reconnaissance and raiding missions. He said they outdid what we did. And in terms of their effect raiding Rommel's supply lines, which is what, air bases and supply lines, that was the specialism of the SAS in that early stage of the war. He said, their effect on us was incalculable. He basically says the supply lines were the key to winning the war in North Africa. And the way they hit our supply lines was, had a massive impact. So there you've got two examples of that thing, that esprit de corps, that sense of all fighting for each other, being there for each other, being able to do what you've been talking about, when you've been shot, injured, wounded, getting straight back on the horse, going out the next day on patrol. Those things that's the intangible something about a great military unit, which makes it special and elite, is being able to inculcate that sense and that spirit. And you see it, you see it in the Ukraine-Russian conflict at the moment. You see that you've got one side who is just absolutely, completely committed. It's been drilled into them. We cannot lose this battle, and that intangible something, even in modern warfare, is absolutely precious. How you teach that, how you distill that, I don't know, but we're quite good at doing it in the British military. Pretty good at doing it,
And did you ever read that book? Gosh, I wish I could remember the name of it. But it was about all the SS elite forces that, to avoid the Nuremberg, I'm guessing, they absconded to Vietnam.
Yeah, I know the book. Yeah,
And they
yeah,
fought with the French Foreign
yeah,
Legion there.
yeah.
I always thought it was called Soldier Eye, but I can never find it when I search for it.
Yeah.
Um, and they just said their tactics were brutal. It was war to them. It was just war. If they wanted to go through an enemy, a known enemy territory, and of course they didn't want to get hit, they'd strap POWs to the side of their vehicle. So it's like, yeah, come and kill us, but you're going to be killing your own side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's insane. So, should we talk about some of these escape stories, Damien? Can you give us
Sure.
give us a flavour?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the ones that springs to mind immediately, because you were mentioning earlier about, downed Allied airmen getting shot down over Europe. So it's actually the last great escape, and it's at number 7, and it's about a Canadian airman. And this guy, Lou Fiddick, was flying in a heavy bomber, doing a bombing raid over Germany. Got shot down just on the German-French border over the Vosges Mountains on the French-German border, on the wrong side, on the German side. And as far as he knew, he was the only one of his aircrew to have bailed out and survived. He lands in the forest. He's slightly injured. He's alive. And he basically managed to link up with French resistance. They find him and they say, look, there's a unit of SAS based in the forest, in the mountains nearby. Would you like to go and, you know, join them? Because, you know, at least then you'll be with, you know, fellow Allied soldiers, speak English, all the rest of it. He said, absolutely. So they dress him as a French peasant and they smuggle him through the German checkpoints and get him up into this SAS camp. And there the then commander, a guy called Captain Henry Carey Druce, who was an absolutely unbelievably brilliant, fantastic, you couldn't make up figure in the Second World War, welcomes Fiddick into his camp, says, what's your story? And he explains, you know, I'm a Canadian fighting with the Royal Canadian Air Force, flying a bomber run, shot down, here I am. And Druce says, well, come and join us. You know, would you like to operate alongside we'll make you an honorary member of the SAS. So, and Fiddick, by chance, back in his native Canada, British Columbia, heavily forested part of Canada, was a woodsman. That was his job. So here he is in a heavily forested Vosges Mountains, and he's got like this, you know, real affinity with the environment. And so in short order, he's on the back of an SAS Jeep, which they parachuted into the Vosges Mountains, going out and machine gunning German convoys. And the really, you know, fascinating thing about that Operation Leuthen was that they deliberately targeted, when that German convoy came along, they let all the trucks go past, wait for the German staff cars, shoot up the 3 German staff cars, kill all the high-ranking officers, and then scoot. That would be the shoot, then the scoot part of the attack. They would jump in their jeeps and get away. The reason being, their aim was to cut the head off the Nazi snake. I.e., if you kill the senior officers, what does that do to the morale, the esprit de corps we've just been talking about, of all the guys under them? Because they think, well, they can't protect our colonels and our generals. You know, what does that say about the rest of us? And what does it say about where the front line is now? Have the Allies broken through? I mean, it's just that spreading of chaos and havoc at the very highest level had a massive impact. And of course, it enraged the enemy. So the enemy came hunting the SAS, as you can imagine. And then the way it becomes an escape story, or the kind of the crescendo of the escape story, is into the hands of the SAS in the Vosges Mountains falls a load of documentation, and it's the order of battle of one of the main Panzer divisions, which is forming the kind of western wall of the Vosges defensive positions. And so the commander, who's then Lieutenant Colonel Brian Franks, who was the commander of 2 SAS, who was parachuted in, by the way, to join this operation 500 kilometers behind the lines, which in itself is amazing for a man of his rank. He says, look, we've got to get that documentation into the hands of General Patton, who sat on the far side of the Vosges Mountains with all his armor, about to start an offensive, because he'll call in airstrikes on those German armored positions. And so he asks for a volunteer. And this chap, Captain Henry Carey Druce, steps forward, fluent French speaker, was in the British Secret Service, was running escape lines for Allied airmen, was captured by the Gestapo and escaped from them. So that's why he ended up serving in the SAS, because he couldn't remain in the Secret Intelligence Service anymore because the enemy knew his identity. So Druce steps forward and says, yep, I'll take those documents to the Allied lines. And he asks for a volunteer. And Lou Fiddick, the Canadian airman, steps forward and says, I'll go too. And so the two of them, on foot, trek through the Vosges Mountains, cross the German lines, which is, at that time of the war, we're talking October, November 1944, the heaviest defended and garrisoned line anywhere in the war. They cross the German lines, and then they have to cross the Allied lines, approach the Allied lines and not get shot. And they got those papers into Patton's hands. And then Druce, as I say, this amazing figure, he became famous for going into battle wearing mauve corduroy trousers and a top hat. That was his preferred dress. Anyway, Druce then finds out that all the radios that the SAS have in the Vosges Mountains have gone unserviceable. The weather's terrible. You know, snow, rain, sleet, and they've all stopped working. So he then loads up his backpack with a disassembled radio, crosses back across the American lines, back through the German lines, back to the SAS camp to deliver a radio so that the operation can continue. So that's just one of the stories in the book, and you know, it typifies again that unbreakable spirit, and especially in what Druce does at the end, that sense that if my mates need me, back in my unit, I will do whatever it takes to be there to stand alongside them. And actually, having got back to the SAS base camp in the Vosges Mountains, he finds it deserted because the Germans have attacked. He then, on his own, has to cross back over the German lines a third time to get back into Allied territory so he can rejoin his unit and continue the fight. So, and the 7 are, each of them is an example of equal, merit and extraordinary courage and tenacity, but always that desire. None of them escape with the desire to retire, or or be invalided out, or any things they could have asked for. They all escape purely with the aim of getting back to their unit and rejoining the fight.
Mm. And did Lou sort of see out his days back in Canada?
Yeah, so he's not allowed to fly any more air missions. Obviously, he's returned to the UK, and they won't let him fly any more air missions because they reason that the enemy will know his identity. Not only that, and it's very tragic. And again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, this is fascinating. So in the process of researching that escape story, I found out that 3 of the airmen from that Lancaster bomber survive, parachute out and survive. One of them's Lou Fiddick. He's on his own. He does his stint with the SAS. 2 others are captured by the Gestapo, and they're taken to Natzweiler concentration camp, where they are tortured and murdered. And as a result of the research I did, I got in contact with not only Lou Fiddick, but with the other airmen's families, and I was able to provide them with information that I dug up, and so that they could find closure and finally put to rest the fate of their father and grandfather, during the war, because they'd known that they'd been on that flight. Obviously, they'd known the aircraft had been shot down, but they weren't certain what had happened to them. Had they survived the air crash, where were they buried? And as a result of that, they returned to the area in the last year or two. Actually, I think it was actually during one of the breaks of lockdown, and they actually put up a memorial. They're getting a plaque put up in Natzweiler concentration camp, so they've got closure in terms of what happened to their loved ones. So, again, you reach out to these people. You don't know. That's a pretty damn sensitive thing to tell people. Your father or your grandfather, he didn't die when the plane was shot down. He survived, and not only that, he was captured by the Gestapo. And not only that, he was taken to a concentration camp, and bad things happened there to these people. And that's quite a lot to deliver to a family who never really know. And of course, if you don't know, you can actually think the best happened, a quick death in the aircraft, died in the wreckage kind of thing.
My gosh, yeah. Opening up a can of worms comes to mind. And I guess the other thing we should mention is that we have a very rose-tinted view of escape, I think, in our, I don't know, our like understanding, our culture, our history. We kind of think it's, you get out there, get your commando knife and start munching through rabbits, But of course, it's not like that, is it? Once you've left the safety of your imprisonment, ironically, you're essentially starving. That's you begin your starvation. At least back then, I'm guessing they could drink water from the rivers and streams, because we did as kids, and it didn't harm us. I know you can't do that now, but there's so much luck involved, isn't there? If you basically you've got to find people that are willing to support you and feed you and put their lives on the line.
Absolutely, mate. You couldn't have hit the nail more on the head. So just one example in Burns' escape. So this is in 41 in the North African desert. He misses the rendezvous with the long range desert group, who were at that stage the SAS's taxi service. That's what they were called. They were taking them to and from these raiding operations before the SAS got their own jeeps. Byrne misses the rendezvous. So he now faces a several 100-mile trek through the North African desert, and he's got, I think, one water bottle with him, and he's got a hip flask of rum. he starts marching through the desert, and it's like day 3 or day 4. He's delirious. He's finally discarded his Tommy gun because what's the point of having a gun when you've got no water? And all he's got left, what they were taught to do during SAS training, was to just during the day, was to take a swig of water, but spit it back into the bottle just to wet their mouths so they could keep their supplies. And so, because he's been doing that so often, he's got this horrendous sludge at the bottom of his water bottle, which is half saliva, a little bit of water in there, undrinkable. And then suddenly he remembers his hip flask of rum. So he tips the rum into the bottle, shakes it together. The rum dissolves this kind of glutinous mass at the bottom of his water bottle, and he manages somehow to get it down him and drink it. And that keeps him on his feet for another 24 hours. But at the end of it, there is nothing that awaits him but death in that environment. And it's only because he's found by some Bedouin, local Arab Bedouin tribesmen, and they take him into their tent and they gave him goat's milk and water, and they feed him, that he manages to survive. And so many of these great escape stories, same with Lou Fiddick, in the Vosges Mountains, the French locals were so supportive of the SS operations and not telling the Gestapo where they were, where their base was, that it's known to this day, the Vosges, as the Vale of Widows, because so many thousands were carted off by the SS and the Gestapo. If you don't tell us where the British parachutists are, we will take all the men in the village aged between 16 and 60, and they're gone. That was the threat. And so many of those French villagers refused to reveal where the British, parachutists, SAS, were. It's to this day, that area of the Vosges Mountain, Moussy village in particular, is known as the Vale of Widows, because there are so few. It's still so vastly underpopulated as a result of the thousands that were carted off to the concentration camps. And what were those French villagers doing? They weren't just shielding the locations of where the SS base camps were. They were feeding them. They were taking, tureens of soup every evening up into the forest to feed these guys. So you're absolutely right. Without the support of the local population, the water within which the fish swim, the hearts and minds stuff that has become the bedrock of SS operations, without winning that battle, without having those people on your side, especially when you're trying to escape and evade, you do not stand a chance, pretty much.
Damien, when's the book coming out? Can we put a link for it below our podcast?
Yeah, sure. I mean, SAS Great Escapes has been out for a few weeks now.
Oh, so it's actually been out. Oh, congratulations!
Yeah,
brilliant.
It's there, and it's an audio book as well. So have a listen, have a read. It's a roller coaster ride.
Who did the audio book for you?
It was a professional voice artist. Can't remember their name. It's one who does a lot of my books. But actually, my next book, I'm recording myself. So I've actually been persuaded by my publisher to give it a go, and to put my dulcet tones on it. So in fact, quite a lot of readers and listeners have said, "Hey, listen, why don't you have a go yourself?" So yeah, I'm taking the plunge.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I'm not a massive fan of audiobooks in the way you hear people go, "Is it an audiobook?" And you're like, "Oh, fuck off, just fucking read the bloody thing." But it sorry, folks, I am joking, of course. But what I found is an audiobook's good in the car when you're literally trapped there and you've got nothing else to focus on other than the white line on the road and not hitting someone. And you can really listen. If I'm in the garage, say, working on I've been building a knife for the last few weeks, and my focus is so much on, grinding a knife and all this sort of stuff that I've realised I've just listened to half an hour. I literally couldn't tell you what I've just listened to. So I guess what I'm saying is this horses for courses. It's the same as if you go to sleep listening to a book. Even if you maybe, let's say, listen to half an hour before you even get drowsy, when you wake up in the morning, you can't even remember that half an hour. It's the way your mind sort of, or my mind sort of shuts down. But I will be fascinated to hear your experience of that, because it's so available now, what with Audible, that anyone can record their own book. I've heard I don't want to say amateurish attempts, but someone who's clearly an amateur, which I guess is fair to say. But even that, in a way, adds a bit of authenticity to.
It does, mate. I mean, Des, going back to Bravo 30, someone had the idea. Why doesn't Des do it? He's got this gritty Sheffield accent. He's the real guy. It's his story. And he sat in the studio and he recorded for several days. And after, the initial teething problems, first couple of hours, 3 hours, when he got into the groove and got his confidence, he delivered a belter. And it's that, the guy reading the stories, the guy was there. What's better than that? You can't get better than that. So yeah, sometimes it's the fact it's slightly raw and rough around the edges and it's real. That's an added bonus.
Des would have had to got Sean Bean, wouldn't he, to do his audio book?
That was the other suggestion. Des on it.
Yeah, he's definitely. It's that thing again, though, is what we were saying earlier. Like, I don't know. You just don't expect to find gritty Yorkshiremen in the SAS, but I mean, I do, because it's all about what we've been saying. But I guess the general public think they're all your bloody Cockney, bloody Londoners, and or well, I don't know. You was it? I think it's Robin Horsfall that gets upset when squaddies are always played by bloody Cockneys. Up the stairs and up the pairs or something. But yeah. When you talk to Des, you do think, my gosh, it's people from all walks of life, all backgrounds, but they've all got that humble quota.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that comes through in his audio recording. It really does.
What's your next project, or what are you working on now, Damien?
So right now, I'm researching a World War II book. So it's the one I was talking about earlier, where I was reading the Rommel papers, for example. So it's a North African desert operation story. 1942, 43. So right back to the early beginnings of special forces, and how we invented this new form of waging war. Churchill called for special duty volunteers, butcher and bolt raiders, set the lands of the enemy aflame. It's looking at how we took that idea and made it a reality. It's that origin story which I really like telling.
I've got an idea for a book for you. Why don't you cover the point where they made selection available? They started the joint selection. So rather than the SAS did their thing and the SBS did theirs, they amalgamated it, and then lo and behold, you start getting Gurkhas like Nims Die pop up and smashing it. And I think there's a good ground there to be covered, because I did a podcast with an SBS chap, and like the banter was out, or the lingo, I should say. You just could immediately tell. And I said, maybe it wasn't in the podcast, but beforehand or whatever. I said, were you in the Marines? He's like, no, I was in the Army. Oh, right. Yeah, I get it. And this is not, I'm not trying to be divisive or holier than thou. No, nothing to do with that. It's just fascinating the some of the core elements of a character that you can tell. If I go into the Tesco's now and some bloke comes up to me on the checkout, I just know if that guy's literally just like before we've even spoken. Certainly when we've spoken. Yeah, that could be an interesting book, because there's an awful lot of ground there to cover. I mean, Nims was the first Gurkha, I believe, to join the SBS.
Yeah.
I mean, could you imagine the Royal Marines Special Boat Service opening themselves to the Gurkhas? It's almost like unheard of.
Absolutely. Yeah, it changes the pedigree entirely. I mean, I met a few years back now. I met one of the American command founders of Delta Force, which is kind of SAS equivalent, and he told me about how he was put through SAS selection, and he was put through it. He came to the UK, went to Hereford to do selection, to learn how we did it, to look at whether that was the way they could model their selection, which of course they did. And it was fascinating to hear it from the American perspective. I kind of expected him to say, I mean, I don't want to stereotype, but I expect to say, yeah, man, I breezed it, in that American way. Quite the opposite. He said, I don't know how you guys do it. I don't know how I got through it. He said,
they'd be saying like, fuck, man, where's the fucking choppers?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He said, I came away from it thinking, can we really put our guys through that? That's how tough it is. Mm-hmm. And going back to Dez's story, of course, he did it twice. He did selection twice. First time around, he gets all the way through to the jungle phase, pretty much done. Yeah. Then he falls on one of those spiked trees in the jungle. You know them. I've been in the jungle. I've had an altercation with one of those spiked trunk. Terrible. Anyway, falls, gets injured, medevaced out, but he's invited back to try again. Does it a second time around. I mean, yeah. So talking to that American guy, really, really fascinating, because they did model Delta Force selection on SAS selection, but they were blown away by how daunting it was. And that's all the packages. That's hill stage and the Brecon beacons. Then you've got the jungle phase, but then you've got the escape and evasion, or resistance to interrogation, whatever you want to call it. And that for some is the worst of all, when it gets inside your head.
My cousin Damien, he joined the Marines as a boy soldier, got commissioned, and I think he left as a colonel in the end. But he told me once that there was a time in the Marines. This would be a long time ago now. He was kind of like that. I think the Aden sort of generation, Aden, Northern Ireland. But there was a time, he said, that all Marines officers went off to Poole to do the SBS acquaint, or the I don't know if they did the whole selection, but I found that that's fascinating, because you could accidentally find yourself in the SBS then if you were like quite good at it. Damien, it's been absolutely wonderful as always. I wish you so much the best of luck. With all God, excuse me, all your projects, your current one, Dez's book, which doesn't need any good luck because it's flying off the shelf, and that's great for Dez, great achievement. And SAS Great Escapes. Alternatively, if you're on the other side of the pond, it's Churchill's Great Escapes. Yes, many congratulations, folks. Have a look below the YouTube video. There'll be links for all Damien's media, etc., and where you can grab hold of these books. And that just leaves me to say massive thank you, Damien, and just stay on the line so I can thank you properly after I play us all out. To everybody at home, big love to you all. Thanks for tuning in again for another episode. If you could please do this one. Boom. Damien, that was a subscribe logo came up. I'm so technologically articulate these days that I'm... Yes, I should have been in the intelligence corps, I think, not... or was that signals? I don't know. But yes, thank you, friends. See you soon.
Cool, man. Yeah. Talk soon, yeah. Cheers, buddy. Look up.